There we go, a nice red background for the Republicans in power, what the Democrats are going to nickname the billion-dollar Congress. By the end of this, you should be able to do the following. And let's start by thinking about how did we describe politics in the United States after Reconstruction. We talked about the weakened presidency. We talked about the Democrats coming back into power. How do the Republicans get back into power? That's what we're going to explore here. In the election of 1888, the Republicans win the biggest victory for one party in almost 20 years. The Republicans regain control of the House. They regain control of the Senate. They regain control of the presidency. They also win a number of the governor's offices up for election across the country. Those aren't depicted on this map, but the House, the Senate, and the presidency are all going to be controlled by Republicans starting in 1889. At the start of 1889, Democrats, now the minority party, are going to use what we call minority tactics to prevent Republican laws from being passed. For example, when they called the roll in Congress to make sure there were enough congressmen there to do official business, Democrats just wouldn't answer the roll. That meant that officially there were not enough people present for a law to be passed or for any official business to take place. Congress has what's called a quorum. There needs to be a minimum number of congressmen in the room before any laws can be passed. So after about a year of this, in 1890, the Speaker of the House, Republican Thomas Reed from Maine, says, you know what, just go ahead and have them counted. The record will show that the congressman from the state of South Carolina is not answering the roll despite being seated at his desk. So they had the Democrats just be counted even if they didn't answer the roll. They do this to get around that minority tactic, and the Republicans can start making laws. The first law, and maybe the most important one they pass, is the McKinley Tariff Act. This raised the tariffs on imported goods higher than ever before. Tariffs, again, are used to protect new industries. So these tariffs are going to protect American companies from competition by overseas companies. The McKinley Tariff also includes a reciprocity provision. In other words, it allowed the president to lower the tariff for other countries if they did the same in their country. So, for example, if England lowers their tariff against American goods, America can lower the tariff on goods from England. Next, Congress passed the Dependent Pensions Act, which gives money to Union veterans and the families of Union veterans. Now, it's not a lot of money per person, but remember, what did we say about the number of veterans and how they dominated politics and business and religion at this time? There are still a lot of veterans in the nation in 1890. This is a lot of money. It's also going to secure some more support for the Republican Party. This was the public perception of Congress at this time. And we'll look at this cartoon more in class if we have time, but what it's clearly depicting is that the people view the Senate and Congress as a whole as corrupt. They look at congressmen and senators as being in the pocket of big business, which is why it's this perception of Congress being corrupt that leads to Congress passing the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. And this bill has bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans, because they don't want their constituents thinking that they're corrupt, because that's a sure way not to get reelected. This is important. This is the first attempt to regulate big business by the federal government, and it made trusts illegal, and it called for stiff penalties for breaking these laws. However, it has some flaws. It is very vague as to what constitutes a trust, and it leads a lot of interpretation up to the courts. Now, the United States is the only industrialized nation trying to regulate business combinations at this time. There are trusts and mergers and monopolies taking place in England and Germany and Japan, and those governments aren't doing anything about it. But before we get too proud, remember, we're not going to really prosecute any antitrust violations until 1900. The Justice Department is rarely willing to use this law. In fact, in 1895, in the Supreme Court case of the United States versus E.C. Knight Corporation, the Supreme Court says that the Sherman antitrust law applies to manufacturers, or does not apply to manufacturers. It only applies to commerce. Now, why manufacturing is not part of commerce, I am not sure, nor are many people. Next, the Congress of 1889, by now in 1890, tackles the issue of monetary policy. In other words, what should our money be backed by? Should it be backed by gold? In other words, you turn in paper money and you can get gold. Or should you be able to turn in American paper money and get gold or silver? Now, remember, at this time, U.S. miners had discovered massive supplies of silver beginning in the 1870s. Remember the Comstock lode, which we studied. What that leads to is an increase in the supply of silver, and as a result, a falling price on silver. In fact, the silver prices were so volatile, they were so up and down, that many European countries, especially Britain and France, had switched to backing their money with gold only. The United States is using only a limited amount of silver to back their money under the Bland-Allison Act of 1878. I remember that because it's not nearly enough. It's just a little bit. It's very bland. So who supported silver? Who wants the government using more silver? Well, for one, miners do. It would increase the demand for silver. If the government is buying silver, now there's more demand for silver, and the price on silver that they're mining will go up. But another big group that wants the government using silver is farmers. And that's because farmers wanted inflation. You see, farmers wanted inflation because that would raise crop prices. It would raise farm wages. But it doesn't change the amount that a farmer might owe on their mortgage. Let's say a farmer borrowed $20,000 to buy the land for his farm. He owes that $20,000 plus interest no matter what. Now, if we have significant inflation and the price on crops increases, well, now that farmer can get more per bushel of crops and he can pay off that mortgage faster. Inflation would make a mortgage easier to pay off. So silver as a backing for our commodity-based money, in other words, money that you can turn in for a valuable good, using silver was very popular in the West and in the South, the big agricultural regions of the country. What some farmers and some miners are calling for or demanding is the free coinage of silver. And when they say free coinage of silver, what they mean is basically unlimited. What they're saying is the government would have to buy any silver offered to it. So any miner comes to the government, they've got to buy the silver that he has off of him. This would create major inflation. This would be bad. So they're going to seek out a compromise. And that's what Congress does when they sign or create the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. It's not free coinage of silver, but it is an increase from the Bland-Allison Act. It calls for the government to purchase 4.5 million ounces of silver per month. This is going to buy up most of the U.S. supply of silver. And in exchange, they're going to issue treasury notes. So now, American treasury notes, American dollars basically, could be cashed in for gold or silver. This policy of using gold or silver, using both metals to back our currency, is known as bimetallism. And bimetallism, this issue over what to back our money with, is going to be very important in the 1890s. Another thing Congress tries to solve is the problem of black voting rights in the South. They pass a federal elections bill which was designed to protect black voting rights in the South. But this does not pass the Senate. And this, the federal elections bill in 1890, is the last major effort to actually enforce the 15th Amendment. This is the last time Congress is going to try to do something about that until the 1950s. So what happens come election year in 1890? This is the midterm election. This is a chance to see how the public feels about what the government has been doing. Remember, the Republicans controlled Congress in 1890. That's what we've been talking about. And this is one of the most important Congresses, this 2-year stretch. It's one of the most important Congresses in U.S. history. They pass a record number of laws that are really going to have an impact and shape later policy. And they really changed the role of the federal government. Now, the election in 1890 will indicate that it's possible they gave more authority to the federal government than the public was comfortable with at that time. Democrats, their opponents, are going to label this Congress that had been controlled by the Republicans the billion-dollar Congress because they had spent so much. Remember, they're purchasing silver. They are legislating business. They are passing out pensions. They are increasing the tariff. So Democrats go after everything that Republicans have done. They label it the billion-dollar Congress. They paint President Harrison as being associated with all of this. And as a result, Republicans lose control of the House in the elections of 1890. In fact, Republicans also lose control of state governments in the elections of 1890. This is an indication that the Republican Party had gone too far there as well. All part of that Republican platform of moral progress, with things at the state level like prohibition laws against alcohol, like laws like requiring businesses to close on Sundays, like requiring English must be used in all schools. It's these kinds of moral progress laws that the Republicans passed at the state level that caused voters to say, whoa, that's a little more than we want government deciding. And that last one, English must be used in all schools, meant that many Democrats at this time joined the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. So hopefully by now you should be able to do the following.